again, right in the current moment?
It's hard to say because we don't know, and we still don't know exactly what happened the last election. And the things that we did to find out what happened in the last election, are only partially revealed. So we've made some progress in acquiring and achieving some transparency, but not enough. So it's important. We still need to worry about it because we don't have the tools to know if it's still happening again. But separate from that, we can see that the pressure on the company has expanded beyond just the issues that we were concerned about in the film. And I saw a headline that is in the making from Bloomberg that there are internal discussions at Facebook for considering to ban political ads in a period of time leading up to the election. So the fact that
They are considering that, did you say, David?
They are discussing that inside of Facebook. That's a headline that's coming out right now as we're speaking. And the fact that that's even being discussed internally as a serious possibility is the result of just continued pressure on the company. And of course, there have been some very specific occasions where the company has acted against ads by the Trump campaign. That's either been misinformation about the census or the use of symbols from Nazi concentration camps. So the campaign has figured out some of the boundaries that will trigger Facebook to act.
So, Brittney, my question is, so Cambridge Analytica is no more, but is there a new Cambridge Analytica who you think is going to be working in this election? Or actually, is it that they don't need Cambridge Analytica anymore?
Well, a lot of the people that ran the Trump campaign and the Trump super PAC for Cambridge Analytica are still very much involved in the Trump 2020 campaign. It's very much a lot of the same players from the top all the way down. And so people that are working in New York, people that are working in San Antonio on Trump's data team. Trump's data team is still headed by the same person that was the project manager for Cambridge Analytica and the Trump campaign's data, who also managed the NRA's data. And that person is now in control of likely a lot of the same data sets, except there's now tons of money and tons of time and loads of staff that they've been able to recruit. And any database, the more data you put into it, the more it learns, the more accurate those models become, and therefore the more easy it is to weaponize that type of information.
So how much more advanced do you think it is going to be in 2020 that it was compared to 2016 then? Considering that, it was already, well, claimed to be anyway, having all sorts of different sources of data and doing all sorts of different things in terms of, the millions of ads which were pumped out during the campaign and the different versions and so on. Do you think it's going to be like a step change better than that?
I definitely do. But regardless of technology advancements, I think the biggest problem is that now all of us lead a completely digital life. Because of coronavirus, we now are spending nearly all of our time on our devices since we don't have the ability to spend time with each other in person. And that makes everybody so much more vulnerable to the types of digital targeting than we were in 2016, when we maybe only spent, 4 to 6 hours on our devices, or maybe up to 8 hours while we're at work if we use our devices for our job. And then we could go and have social time and actually talk to people and have, a break from any of the ads and pop-ups and targeted content that we're seeing all of the time. Now it's relentless. So the ability to influence people is now nearly 100% of the time. And that's what we need to be concerned about.
So, but there is it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, I think we've all spent quite a large part of the last year, haven't we, going around, going to events, talking about Facebook, talking about how nothing has changed. And we kind of all been pushing away at this. And then suddenly, just recently, there's been a big moment, hasn't there, in terms of pressure on Facebook. I wonder, Karim, do you want to talk about that? Did you see this coming, and do you think it's going to work? So this is the advertiser boycott, which we're starting to see really take off at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, I think that, you don't really know when the moment of change that is going to capture the imagination of a larger general public, where that comes from or how it happens, in my opinion. Having made a few films that are kind of in change movements, like we did with The Square, and like we hope this film becomes as well. But I think what's clear is, like, last year when the film came out on Netflix, it was the same week that Facebook had received its fine. And that was a huge moment that led to all kinds of world attention, all kinds of reactions, major drop in the market share of the company. And as Kara Swisher was...
Actually, Karim, when they got the fine, that was when the share price went up, if you remember.
Sorry, yes.
That's right. That was the really deeply depressing moment when they were at record $5 billion, and it was like, yeah, the share price went up because it's like $5 billion. What's that to us? Nothing. I
remember Kara at the time said that it'd be each as 0 to the 5 and make it a $50 billion fine. And then that was more appropriate to getting kind of Facebook to pay attention. I think that since then, we all, as you've said, Carol, went on our kind of different campaigns and different corridors of this conversation. And it's been great to see that there's been a moment yet again where people are just frustrated at Facebook and really starting to see that all roads lead back to Facebook. And as we've trying to voice this, as you've been so articulate in calling, if Facebook was a country, it's kind of like North Korea, which is a fantastic kind of frame.
You just quote me at me, Karim.
I did. Quoted you. Well, I mean,
that was an amazing moment for me. Thank you.
But it's true. It's like, what else has to happen for us to realize that no matter what cause you care about as your number one issue, whether it's the environment or social justice or racial justice or income inequality, we cannot have a healthy democracy as long as Facebook has a toxic monopoly over our civil discourse online. And we have to address that. And I think that it's great that the advertisers are taking notice, but I think we have to use this as a moment to keep the pressure going and demand real change now.
Carol, has reported so much on this topic and so deeply on this topic. How do you feel things have changed in the last year? And what have you been doing over the last year to get the word out more, challenge Facebook?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, it's quite interesting. I feel actually that, there is sort of key moment, but I feel that this whole story has, I think I describe it as it's kind of radicalized me, because I think before I started reporting on this stuff, I had this old-fashioned idea of journalism that it could reveal great truths, and by revealing great truths, you brought, change these things. Great problems were fixed, or at least the world was appalled and demanded change, and etc. And I think, seeing the way that there has just been this total lack of accountability. So the fact that, having witnessed these different institutions try to hold Facebook to account and fail, and realize that it's just this thing of being absolutely beyond the rule of law, essentially beyond national governments and parliaments, and to have become this uniquely powerful global institution. It's just really made me sort of pause and think and wonder about what that means really, and therefore what the next steps are going forward. And I suppose, so this is what I'll throw it to David now, because this is why I'm so interested in the advertiser boycott, because it's trying to do something which, like, Congress hasn't achieved, the British Parliament hasn't achieved, the FTC didn't achieve. So, and there's two, I mean, on the one hand, it's sort of like amazing now that something is having an impact. Facebook is, like, you know what I mean, it's being forced to the table. But you've probably read the same reports that I have, which is of them, you know, Mark Zuckerberg reportedly saying, so what? Actually, we depend upon little advertisers much more than the big ones, and they can't afford to desert us. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's been my analysis of that. The advertisers who have signed on to the boycott, which number near 1,000, and include many different companies, most of these companies do not rely on Facebook for their bottom line. And one analyst modeled out that if the top 100 spenders on Facebook boycotted, that it would only impact 6% of their total revenue. And I doubt that the 1,000 who have boycotted even adds up to the 6,000, to the 6%. So a boycott in the traditional sense could not hurt Facebook. The boycott has a PR effect, which is one of Facebook's only weaknesses, because it is able to resist regulation so effectively, resist investigation so effectively, that the only way that we are able to push back against the company is through giving its public relations and communications department a hard time. And so that's inadequate. And the fact that there aren't enough companies that could boycott Facebook shows how invincible its power is. So I would say that the boycott is illustrating the desperate measures that the world is taking to collectively respond to the company. But it also reveals the feudal nature that most businesses have with Facebook. They basically sharecrop a field of attention data that's based on the harvested user data that shows which users will achieve the best conversion rates. And most small businesses are living and dying by that kind of a business model. So that's, troubling. But separate from the boycott, the recent publishing of the House Intelligence Committee transcripts were of interest to me long after the scandal. And two transcripts are very relevant to the film, The Great Hack, and where we are a year later: the transcript of Alexander Nix and the transcript of Brad Parscale. And in the transcript of Brad Parscale, he confirms what we have always worried about, was that tainted Facebook data was uploaded back into Facebook and used to target voters in 2016. So we had a sort of round trip, 360 degrees of data harvested from Facebook to create a model, illicitly obtained, fraudulently retained, and then used in 2016 by being uploaded back in. And Parscale acknowledges this in his interview. I think that's significant in understanding the final story, that Facebook was complicit in the beginning and the end of the scandal. And that
could you explain that process more one more time for people? Because this is something that I'm always asked about, and I always want you there explaining it.
Sure. There's been a lot of skepticism that Cambridge Analytica was not actually used in 2016 by the campaign. But Brad Parscale's interview with the House Intelligence Committee shows us that it was used, that Cambridge Analytica data was used by the Trump campaign to target voters in 2016. And how they do that is they created a list of voters that they used Cambridge Analytica algorithms to generate. And then those voter lists were uploaded into Facebook using Facebook's feature that allows advertisers to match external data to Facebook accounts, so that voters can be matched and targeted as individuals one by one. And so we first can sort of demolish the myth that was propagated that Cambridge Analytica was never used. Actually, it was. And then the data used was tainted data. because we know that Alexander Nix lied to Facebook when he certified that they deleted the data. And so we can assume that the data was used to make more algorithms and models that were then used in 2016. So we have to cut through so many lies and deceptions and misinformation, even in the press, to realize the full circle here, that data was illicitly harvested in like 2014, 15, and then those models were used in 2016. And Facebook was the source of the data, and then also the place where it then was reinserted into the process. And so we haven't really reckoned with that issue. And then the other thing that was revealed in the House Intelligence Committee transcripts was how much Alexander Nix lied to Congress about so many things. And just the way that these folks have been able to get away with lies and deceptions, even in the investigations, contributes to the frustration that I think the advertiser boycott is culminating with, is a desperate sort of request for justice here and changes to tactics and business models and behaviors.
But it's just, I mean, it's so interesting because, like what you just said there, David, there has been, it's not just that there's been no reckoning, there is not even any public understanding of that, is there? There's not even, as you say, even at the media level, even at the tech reporter level, that is fundamentally not understood, is it? Not being communicated. And it's still in the, there's this sort of remarkable thing, which is that even though we know that, you know, the scandal triggered these massive fines, for example, it's still in the realm of like the Cambridge Analytica kind of conspiracy. Do you know what I mean? I don't know, Brittney, if you want to speak to that, what's the sort of reaction you get from people when, you know, the Cambridge Analytica is, what do you think people kind of like understand from this now?
Yeah, I mean, I still think that people are looking at it from a 10,000 foot level. You know, I still think every time I do a press interview or I speak on stage, people are still asking, so Cambridge Analytica doesn't exist anymore. Should we expect any of these things this year? And I always have to explain to people, well, you know, there's now hundreds or thousands of Cambridge Analyticas because people saw that a data-driven strategy is so successful, and now they're able to use even more advanced techniques that even Cambridge didn't have access to at the time. So I think that it is so important. And, you know, what has really, I suppose, occupied my mind this entire year has been that as soon as we hit January 1st, we get the first ever real privacy and data protection law in the United States. And as all of us here have openly debated, okay, well, the US is the only place that can really regulate Facebook. So until we get a federal law in the United States or the United States to properly act on Facebook, you know, we're all just waiting for them to self-regulate otherwise. So we pass CCPA and Facebook says, well, we don't need to abide by CCPA because we don't sell user data. Okay, so now we have to write an entire update to that, which is going to be on the November ballot as a ballot initiative. So a yes, no. So anyone that's listening to this in California, please vote in November. It is so incredibly important to look down the ballot at the ballot initiatives and make sure that you're voting for that. But coronavirus, all of a sudden, everyone's leading a digital life and governments are saying, hey, we're going to give you all more time to comply with data protection laws. We don't want to put undue pressure on businesses. So take your time on figuring out how to protect people's data. It's no longer as important. You have other things to worry about. Now, I would say actually data protection is so much more important now because we are producing exponentially more data than we were before this epidemic. So this is such a bigger deal than even when all of us started working on this a few years ago. And I think now more than ever, we need to take this seriously, that we've had stalemate for the past few years on federal legislation. And after we figure out who we're working with after the vote on November 3rd, we need to really push very hard to actually get some federal legislation through. And the slowness of that, the fact that we have lost momentum due to the pandemic, is what has really kind of kept me up at night, I suppose.
So I'll just actually, I tell you what, because we discovered that we weren't live streaming, I don't think, at the beginning, were we? So I think people missed the explanation of. So we unfortunately, we don't have Cara Swisher with us, which we're very sad about, because that would have been great. So we are anyway. So oh, she's coming. You're muted.
Oh, she wrote us that she got the time wrong, but that she's joining. She's finding a private space.
Oh, great. Okay. Oh, that's good. So we can ask her some questions on the way. So, Jahan, actually, I'm going to jump over to you in terms of this boycott. What do you think? Do you feel optimistic about it? Do you think that Facebook is going to be forced to change, or do you think it's just going to be a bit of a flash in the pan? They're going to make some noises, and then it's just back to business as usual, and we're about to have another terribly corrupted election again. What's your sort of feeling?
I mean, we just got an audience member question saying, if boycotting doesn't work and there aren't enough people deactivating Facebook, what do we do? And I sort of am in the same boat. I feel like I don't know whether it's going to take, and I would throw that question back at Brittney and yourself. Is it going to take more legislation for things to change? Because doesn't look like there is much changing, especially with this pandemic and everybody being online and so much more data.
But I think beyond that, so the whole thing is that you say it's going to take more legislation, but the fact is Trump may very well win your next election. And we can see that Trump's strategic aims and Zuckerberg's strategic aims are sort of in alignment, aren't they? So realistically, that legislation, if Trump wins, isn't going to happen. And this would just be a consolidation, won't it, of Facebook's power? So, David, you're Karim.
Well, I think we need to start. You know, if you look at the gripes that people have around the world with Facebook, they're quite personal, and they really, these are not minor things we're talking about. When you were talking about, the fragility of democracy around the world, we're talking about the promotion of hate speech. We're talking about the support of genocide, like what's happened with the Rohingya. We're talking about the broadcasting of live events that should never be broadcast. So these are fundamental flaws that are causing major harm. And I think it's time to start targeting, just like Facebook's allowing the targeting of users, we should start targeting the Facebook employees on a daily basis, as some people have indicated could be a good idea before. Not going to name names. And I think it's time to start targeting the employees, because I think it's like the Facebook is only as good as its engineering. It's only as good as being able to be seen as the top place that the top minds in the world who are going to continue to invent the future want to work at. And I think the image, it does matter. And I think targeting both the engineers who work at the company and the young engineer core that is going to be, filling the company with the kind of messaging that we think is important to being a responsible technology company, and to have a responsible data policy, and to break us out of this false binary of, the admission ticket to the connected world is give us all your data in an unregulated way and we'll promise to do our best. Like that we can no longer accept that choice.
Can I? Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to butt in here as well to say that somebody who I would really like to mention at this point, and which is something that every Facebook employee should know about, is, I don't know how familiar you are with Maria Ressa, who's the amazing journalist in the Philippines, who is now looking at a jail sentence over this ridiculous cyber libel case. And she very clearly says that if it wasn't for Facebook, this would have never happened. And what's so fascinating about the Philippines is that election, the election which saw Duterte win, that was 1 month before Brexit, just a few months before the US election. And it is very clearly in 2016 is a toxic waste dump of subverted elections when nobody was looking out for this stuff. But we know that all sorts of things were going on the platform. We certainly know in Britain that our election was deeply subverted and illegally so. It broke, what happened on Facebook broke, multiple of our electoral laws. Anyway, I just sort of, it's really interesting, that thing you said. I mean, I just sort of feel that that the employees, the investors, this should be, they need to have this on their moral conscience, is that, these harms, they are now complicit with, really, aren't they?
Absolutely, I completely agree. What we also need to acknowledge is, although Facebook is one of the biggest problems in this area, it's not the only problem. Coronavirus has brought so many new threats to data protection and privacy that new issues come up every day. But I think it would be interesting for us to talk a little bit about coronavirus contact tracing and the new immunity passports and what this means globally for data protection issues. I mean, obviously, I think you're completely right when you say that trying to get national legislation through in the United States under Trump that is going to undermine his own best interests is going to be next to impossible. So what we've started doing in the US is going state by state where Trump doesn't have any control over it, and passing laws that are going to be very strong because they're in California or New York, states that everyone else looks to for guidance that can then help replicate. So in the state of New York, I advised on the writing of the first coronavirus contact tracing data protection law. It's Senate Bill number 8448. And for instance, that was the first law written for the United States. And it, for instance, includes a ban on that data being shared with law enforcement if it's actually meant for public health. Anti-discrimination clauses to make sure that, for instance, peaceful protesters cannot be targeted using this type of data. These are new concerns that we never even had before, which are completely mind-boggling.
I tell you what, Brittney, I'm going to cut you off there because it's an interesting segue to David, because laws are all very well, but they only work if you enforce them. And David, you're still, hey, Carl.
Hi, so sorry. You have no idea what's happening in my life.
It's great to have you. I'm totally taken over as moderator, by the way. So I'm just now going to ask questions at you instead of the other way around.
All right, well, you're a better journalist than I am. So
it's a total free for all now. But actually, I was just going to David, because we're talking about there's no point in having data laws if they're not enforced. And David, you're still waiting, aren't you, for the final report from the British, the Information Commissioner's Office here on, do you remember, if everybody remembers, there was this very dramatic moment when Cambridge Analytica's servers were seized and they began this like amazing investigation into what data they had and where it came from. And of course, David's case was very important in this, but you still haven't found the answers, have you?
Yeah, the basic answers that everyone had about the company were supposed to be answered through the ICO's forensic investigation of the seized servers. And in April 2019, the commissioners gave her an update to the Parliament committee saying we're almost through all the servers and we hope to provide a narrative for the American people as to how their data was made into algorithms and how it was used in the presidential campaigns. And the report is forthcoming, and the report is still not published. And so we still don't have that rare chance of having a neutral arbiter like the ICO who can provide a forensic analysis so it's not subject to controversy or dispute. And we are running into the next election and we don't even have this. And I've tried to think about why do we not have this report? And I've only come up with 3 possible explanations. One is that Cambridge Analytica SCL is still under investigation by the Department of Justice. And so they're cooperating with the ICO to withhold the report based on that ongoing investigation. The evidence to find that plausible is that the FBI 302s that have been released under FOIA through BuzzFeed and CNN show that Steve Bannon 302s were sort of declassified as recently as the end of 2019. So that indicates, harm to an ongoing matter. The second possibility as to why the ICO report is not yet released is that there's political pressure inside the UK to not release it. And some members of the original committee have indicated they think that might be the case. And then the third possibility is just the ICO is totally overwhelmed. It doesn't have the capacity to finish its report, or a combination of all the above. But it's really frustrating that we've worked so hard and waited so long, and British taxpayers have paid a lot of money to fund the report that the world is due to finally get answers. So it shows that the hardest part of data protection is the enforcement, and that enforcement itself is subject to partisan politics and or international cooperation, which is both a positive and a negative.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Cara. So since we've been discussing somewhat pessimistically the boycott, the Facebook boycott by the advertisers.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your view? Is it going to work, or is it going to fail like everything else has?
Well, I have a column, pretty tough column, about to come out in the Times like this. I think and I've said this, I feel like it's symbolically, it's fantastic. And there are some significant advertisers, and anybody else, if this was Fox News or other people, except for the MyPillow guy that he has keeping him, Tucker Carlson, afloat, for example. It really hurts these organizations when these boycotts happen, like if it's a Laura Ingraham show or whatever. In the case of Facebook, with 8 million advertisers, it's a drop in the bucket from a financial point of view. And Mark has said as much in meetings. He's been very cavalier, saying they're going to go back and it's not a big deal. And his second part of his quote was really interesting, that he doesn't want to, it's not a good thing to do to him, because then if he does what they want, it looks like he's capitulating, which is, I don't understand why that matters whatsoever. So I don't think it will have much impact. What'll be interesting though is the growing public distaste for Facebook. And I think everybody does get that. And even if people don't leave it, just like right now a story just broke, I don't know if you saw it, but they're considering, it's from Bloomberg, Facebook considers political ad blackout ahead of US election. That's interesting, but the ads aren't really the problem. It's the content, right? As you all know, and the use of different content mechanisms to convince people that they're reading real news when it's not. So I think they definitely feel pressure, and the kind of continued drumbeat from, the different civil rights groups, the report on their own, could create a situation where they feel like they have to do things like this, like do an ad blackout. But for me, most of the stuff Facebook does is small, weighted out, slow walking. And in the end, they don't care as long as the stock is as high as it is. And by the way, the stock has never been higher. So that's, I think, really, unfortunately, where the rubber meets the road in the United States. So until regulators act in some significant way, I don't see, there's a hearing coming up on the 27th by David Cicilline, which is great, except that Mark is hidden in a crowd of people that aren't even nearly as close to the wrecking ball he's become. And so, with Tim Cook there, they have issues around the App Store. Jeff Bezos most certainly has issues around the marketplace. Google is Google, right? They just have all the search market. But in terms of actual malevolent impact on the human race and the elections and everything else, I think they don't have to do anything, especially when the finances are so good for that company and there's no other game in town. So I think regulation is the only way to go at this point. And significant regulation.
There's a question from the audience. If we delete Facebook, how do we seek out ways to get Facebook to remove our data, and how can we take steps to remove our data from these companies' possession?
You can do that. You can, when you're on Facebook, when you leave, you can delete your data. I just came off of Facebook. I haven't deleted my data yet. Of course, they have to sign on to rejoin Facebook in order to delete your data. I forgot to do it on my way out, but there's nothing there but pictures of cats, so it doesn't really matter. But you have to you can get control of your data and have them delete it, and then you can then leave. I just think, a massive consumer departure would be great, but that's not really going to work because they have Instagram. You know what I mean? Like, and people for some reason don't see the difference, even though it's the same. And that's very tightly wound into Facebook, but you can delete it and get off. You can do that.
For people that want other assurances, you can also do a subject access request under GDPR or CCPA, and ask if they're still holding any of your data and request the right to delete. So that's possible. If anyone wants to know more about that, please reach out to us, and I can get you people that can hold your hand through that process.
Brittney, there's another question for you from the audience. Are there going to be hindsight files released for other countries that Cambridge Analytica operated in?
Oh yeah, there's quite a lot more stuff coming out this year. It's been quite a few months of work with groups that I cannot disclose here, that you'll be seeing over the coming months. We've been waiting for the coronavirus news to die down a little bit so that people actually listen and see. So please look out for it. That Twitter account is not null and void. There's a lot more information to come out. As all of you know, there's a lot, and we're going to put it out when it matters and when everyone's going to be paying attention.
I have a question for Kara on this as well, since she's new, joining us late. So what does give you hope, Kara, in terms of this moment, and how can, what does, like, other than government regulation, which is not really in our control, like what can we do, and is there hope in the valley? Like, is there a new generation that is kind of different than Zuck, or are we with this way of thinking?
Well, you know, you just saw the recent fighting over tech versus media, that ridiculous clubhouse, which Scott Galloway and I called douche house. You know, that's their attitude. I keep saying that, like, they feel like victims, and Carol knows this really well. They act like victims, and how could you do this and this and that. And they have a real antipathy towards the media. Now, that's the older people. Let me just say, there is a generational divide among younger and older entrepreneurs. You know, when you get into the very wealthy people, they get very victimized. And the younger people, I think, are really embarrassed by some of it. And so, yes, I do think there's a level of entrepreneurs who are very much wanting a ton to be different. And I hope that works. And I hope it actually goes global too. That's another thing, is that there's global and global diversity. You're not going to have it just in this one part of San Francisco. My worry is that with coronavirus, and I've written this many times, you're going to see them getting more. People don't have the attention to hate Facebook or to delete Facebook or whatever, and so they get sort of sucked along into the. There's so many other problems, like they're not the top of the list essentially, and so that's my worry, is that legislators here lose interest in it. You know, if there's a Vice President Kamala Harris, a Vice President Elizabeth Warren, as Mark Zuckerberg said, that's his existential crisis, which is shocking to me, because I would think climate change would be an existential crisis of anybody, but that's okay. It's Elizabeth Warren for him. You know, you get that and you'll get some trouble for them, I think. I don't know. Carol, how do you feel? I mean, I know we have to wrap up, but I'm just curious after all this, you know, you kind of started it, and you guys, of course, Brittney, you're right in the middle of it, but how do you feel right now?
I mean, I mean, it's good, isn't it? That I think for the fact that even for this advertiser boycott to have got some traction, there was that wasn't necessarily going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that is a really big deal, that actually people are starting to understand that there is something deeply toxic about the effects that Facebook is having in the world.
Sure.
There's still things which just blow my mind, that, you know, like, talk about lack of reckoning. Like, okay, you can accept that it seems to have been completely glossed over, the fact that it enabled this subversion of these, you know, all of these elections in 2016. But it just does, I find it absolutely gobsmacking, the thing of the Rohingya. You know, the fact that, you know, like, so I wrote this thing for the on last weekend about Facebook, and I get a legal query because I sort of say, you know, they helped incite a genocide, and it's like, comes back flagged. What are you sure? What is the proof for this kind of thing?
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, here's the proof. Actually, it said it in a United Nations report.
Right.
You know, it's that, but that has not registered the shock. You know, the kind of, you know, that how you know, it's the, how can anybody like run a company where you've been told that and that you are absolutely not taken that responsibility, not made amends, and you know, you've not wanted to burn the company to the ground afterwards and ask, actually, what can we do differently?
Yeah.
So that there's still, I think we're only at the beginning, I feel, of like a public awareness of the things which have gone really deeply wrong. But I am a bit hopeful that is now starting to turn.
Well, I think they definitely know they don't hang the moon with anybody. I think that's one thing. And the other thing is just, I was watching a movie called, I think it's called Deep Waters, about DuPont, you know, chemicals, same thing. It's the same, you know, it's the same idea. And I was trying to think of what the right comparable is, because it's not cigarette companies, it's not chemical companies. I decided my new example in this Times column is, it's like a maker of meat, a seller of meat. And they're saying, you know, we sell good meat and there's some tainted meat that goes out the door. And, you know, you yourself can decide if it's bad for you. You should taste it and eat it and vomit and perhaps die. But we don't want to decide on the meat. You know what I mean? Like, that to me is the way. And I was like, and so, you know, hey, some people will die. Yeah. But, you know, but you get to choose. We want to be the arbiter of the meat. We don't want to be the arbiter of the meat. And so that's what they remind me of. And we have legislation around meats, even though it isn't perfect by any stretch, as you saw from recent stories and stuff like that. But, you know, I think lawsuits are the way this is going to go down. Lawsuits, the ability to be accountable and liable for some of this stuff. I think that is the eventual end game for these companies, not just lawsuits. You know,
that's interesting.
I think,
you know, maybe we should just do, because we haven't got that much time left. I wonder if there's, I mean, one thing I've been thinking about this week is the, you know, there's this Facebook oversight board, which has been
okay. Oh, sorry.
So yeah, what do you make of that, and what would a real Facebook oversight board look like, and what would it do?
I'm not touching that one. David, go for it, David.
Well, the oversight board, as we know, doesn't even start until
the fall,
and we don't even know when it's going to start. It actually doesn't have the power that people think it does.
That's not.
So people may mistakenly think that it can make policy or make decisions, but it can just review appeals, and it's really just advisory. It's an example of the sham of the FTC settlement and the fact that the $5 billion fine hides the scam underneath it, that the company got a slap on the wrist and then is not really governed or penalized in a necessary way. And Zuckerberg never was deposed by the SEC, so nobody knows the truth. So I think, you know, this oversight board is window dressing, beautifully created with some really respectable people, but it's structurally designed to be irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's a Davos dinner party. It's a nice Davos dinner party for the League of Nations. Okay.
You know,
I don't know, what do you guys think? Who made the film? What would you make on the board if you, and Brittney, how do you think of it?
You guys go ahead, please.
I mean, Brittney, tell us about the people on the board.
Yeah, I think it's like the board is, you know, my concern really is that when I want to hear from everybody else is like, do you think what's the next frontier of what's going to be weaponized on Facebook heading into the election? And is COVID going to be weaponized? And is Facebook cool with having weaponized COVID and disinformation and having anti-vaccine content flooded and be used by, you know, in a political landscape? Like,
of course, Kanye is running on an anti-vax platform, if nobody noticed. So yeah, that's going to be a new resurgence of disinformation like we haven't seen in a little while. I think what we need to remember as well is, you know, we have a massive focus on Facebook because yes, Facebook is one of the biggest threats to democracy, and probably an executive board like we've never seen, where they seem to not actually acknowledge most of the problems that they cause. Whereas We have on Twitter, in the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, we had over 50,000 pieces of disinformation and fake news per day that were causing people to take substances that were killing them or leaving them in hospital in countries all over the world. And Twitter in the beginning was a much bigger problem than Facebook, actually. And so we need to acknowledge that data protection and privacy regulations and legislation in general, not just the regulation of these platforms, are the bigger picture, and also where we can have a much more optimistic and hopeful conversation. Despite everything that we're talking about, despite everything that we've been through, I'm still an eternal optimist that no, we're not going to be able to protect ourselves during this election, or maybe not in the next couple of years, but let's look 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years ahead at what we are going to be able to do. I've spent most of the past 6 months, working on teaching parents, teachers, and children, teaching the next generation how to protect themselves online. So just for everyone that's listening, something that was released last year is a new global standard through IEEE called DQ, which stands for Digital Intelligence Quotient, like IQ or EQ. And over 10 years, a lot of the world's biggest technology universities, departments, and ministries of technology and innovation and think tanks came together to develop this indicator set so that you can actually give people a DQ score. And they developed a platform in order to test that and to teach people how to be more digitally intelligent. What are your data rights? What are basic cybersecurity protocols? How do you spot fake news and disinformation and be media literate? How do you use emotional intelligence online, especially if you're anonymous on social platforms? How do you stop your addictions from your technology and have a healthy, both physically and mentally healthy relationship with technology? This is in kind of an 8-pillar indicator set, and it's only an 8 to 10 hour program, either for children or professionals. And it's very possible that kids, before they ever get their first own device, could be well-informed and educated and never develop the bad habits that all of us have already. That's really where my hope for the future comes from, because I know how hard it is to implement legislation and regulation, make that enforceable, make the law catch up with technology. So, empowering people to protect themselves is the biggest thing that we can do. And, that's one of the greatest gifts that the Great Hack brought to people around the world, is for people to actually be informed and aware, and to look at their phone and their computer with a bit of skepticism, take everything they see with a bit of salt, and actually think, is this something that I was targeted with? Did someone pay for this to be shown to me? Where is this coming from? What is that intention? And then you can live a more normal life and be less vulnerable to the types of manipulation that we're seeing every day.
I have a question though about that, because I am always a romantic optimist, and that's, I agree, we have to be optimistic, but I really believe that we are at a key crossroads here. And I don't think we have 3 years. I think if the same tactics that were used in 2016 are used in an even more weaponized way, I don't know how we get out of this. Because if we can't get our shit together in the quote unquote free world and the leaders of the free world, then what message are we saying? Are we leaving to everyone else? What happens to the Maria to Maria and in the Philippines, and to people all over the world who don't have these protections? And how are we standing complicit in enabling like a kind of a tech fascist kind of reality to just kind of continue and to not be kind of accounted for? Like, I just don't know how we move forward in having a semblance of normalcy. And especially now as this has moved from, in my opinion, beyond a democracy issue and into a public health issue as well. Like, at what point is Facebook going to be seen as something that is as Carol said, it's out of control. It's North Korea, and we're all kind of just sitting around paralyzed by its inability to be held to account.
Please register to vote. Register to vote right now. Tell all your friends and family to register to vote immediately, and help people understand how, if they feel that they're vulnerable, that they can do that from home, because a lot of people have never registered absentee before. And in the United States, this is going to be the reality for a lot of people. We need everyone to get their ballots on time. We need them to understand how to fill that out and how to turn it back in on time, and how that is a very legitimate way to vote. Do not listen to what Donald Trump tells you. It's 100% legitimate. It's a vote that counts. And please, please register to do it, and tell everyone else around you to do so as well.
So listen, I think we're out of time almost. So the only thing I'd say is, David, what was, I just thought to wrap, what was your most batshit insane moment of your great hack journey of the last year? Have you had, what was the most bizarre conversation that you came out of it? And Karim and Jahan, that one to you as well.
Wow, I think probably when I was in my trial in London back in March of 2019, and during the trial, we were not allowed to ask about Cambridge Analytica because it was off limits, because it was apparently under investigation. So that even in a bankruptcy hearing, you couldn't hear about the company because it was still under investigation. So, and this was in March of 2019. Oh. So that was a crazy moment for me to sort of poke at the bear in the courtroom.
And I'm telling you, she's not getting on Facebook. That's all I'm saying. That's how I'm gonna.
Oh my gosh, she's beautiful.
She is. She's a cutie. I saw your kid, so I thought, bring out the children's. But you know, like, I know it sounds dumb, but I think it is not. Well, you can. I'm glad we're all feeling like, hey, we can do something about it. But I do think these companies have. It's impossible. It's like pushing back the ocean, and so we really have to push our legislators and our lawyers and others to understand it's not, people cannot fight this alone. They have to fight it together. And that's one great thing about your film that showed that it's calculated, it's aimed at you and everything else. And she's definitely not getting on Instagram also either.
Good on you, Cara.
Yeah.
Ruben Jahan, do you think you'll return to the subject?
We live in the subject. I mean, you know, all of us, everybody that has a phone and everybody that's on social media. So we deal with the subject every day, and we think about the subject all the time. With
what would be Great Hack 2? What would be part 2? If you had
Very good question.
You know, we get messages from around the world with people asking for more information. What's so fascinating is how little so many countries around the world still know about what Cambridge Analytica did in their elections. I mean, it's unbelievable to think that they still don't have clarity as to where they worked, who paid for what happened, that it's still so murky, and that election transparency, we're so far from understanding that. So on that side, I think there's still a lot of work to do. But I think that the area that, you know, attracts kind of all of us to continue to look at this is that the story's not over. I mean, it's just like, you know, I remember when reaching out to Carol recently, and I was like, is this the sequel? And she's like, I think we just did the prequel. So I think we're just getting started, and there's a lot more to go and a lot more to understand. And again, I think it's about this false choice between, you know, we need technology to expand our capacity, and that comes at, you know, allowing it to operate in this space where ethics don't matter, and where, you know, you could just break it and fix it later. As we're seeing, you know, democracy is not, you know, shouldn't be Zuck's to break, and we're left with the pieces. So I think we got a lot of work to do. There's more stories to tell. And for anyone listening, you know how to reach us online, and keep sending information and keep following the great work of, you know, Cara and Carol and David and Brittney, who are continuing to put this topic front and center for everyone to continue to understand.
So I think that's probably, is that a wrap?
Yes.
Have I got
Sure.
the right term there? Is that what you think? It's been really good fun to see you all, even in a funny circumstance of doing a panel together. Yeah. So please continue what you're all doing. And I think we've just got to, we've all got to keep talking, haven't we, about what we most fear about the election in November, really, and the way that Facebook can and will be used to be weaponized essentially against democracy. So anyway,
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
Yes. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
What? Oh, no, we're still.